Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so delighted to be with you again this afternoon with the Community Research Academy. I am so happy today. We have Dr. Inmaculada de Melo Martin with us. Professor Martin, she's Professor of Medical Ethics in the Division of Medical Ethics at Weill Cornell Medicine. She holds a PhD in philosophy, a MS in molecular biology. Her research interest includes bioethics and the philosophy of science. Most of her work has been on the ethical and epistemological issues related to reprogenetics and molecular genetics. You can ask her to explain that to you. She has been particularly concerned with calling attention to the importance of science when making ethical judgments, the importance of ethics when evaluating new scientific and technological developments, and proposing public policies, and the importance of attending to the social and political context when assessing science and technology. So I know you, everyone, I know you're interested this afternoon in hearing and talking with Dr. Inmaculada about medical ethics, because right now the country's in a quandary, and ethics is one of the big things we talk about a lot. So before the next voice that you will hear will be Dr. Inmaculada de Melo Martin. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So welcome everybody. I don't know whether you can show yourself. If you can, that would be fantastic, because it's easier to have a conversation that way rather than just black screens with names. And I am hoping that we will be able to have a conversation. So if you could do that, I would really appreciate it. So I have some slides to talk a little bit about research ethics, but I am certainly happy to talk about things related to research ethics in the context of what is going on. So feel free to ask me any questions while I am talking. Don't be afraid to interrupt me. As I said, I would rather have a conversation than just lecture. So this is just again a quick introduction about why ethics is relevant when we talk about science. Many people think that, well, there is science and then there is ethics, and they are not connected, but that clearly is not the case. Science is a social enterprise. It aims at acquiring truth, or approximate truth, and avoiding error. So those are things that we want to achieve with science. It also aims to improve human well-being and the well-being of others, perhaps animals and certainly the planet. And so in order to do that, it requires trustworthiness. It requires that scientists trust each other in producing science, but it also requires that we trust scientists and the scientific enterprise in order to be able to make choices. It requires fairness in a variety of aspects of the conduct of research. Accountability, responsibility. Scientists are responsible to us and to institutions, obviously, of the work that they do. And it also raises concerns about distributive justice. How do we distribute resources when we are conducting scientific research? So it also involves duties to others, moral duties, certainly, sometimes also legal duties. Duties to animals when we do research with them, duties certainly to human subjects to protect them. That's going to be the main concern of this session, but also duties to colleagues who work with one, to institutions, to research institutions, and to society ultimately, given that for the most part, society funds a significant amount of research and receives both the benefits or the harms of research. So all of these are ethical concerns and ethical values, and without them, we wouldn't be able to produce scientific knowledge. So because ethics is an integral part of research, of science, then we want to be able to assess, whether science is actually fulfilling its responsibilities, its ethical responsibilities. So we have research ethicists who are concerned with evaluating ethical questions that researchers, as researchers, have to face. So of course, researchers have other responsibilities as human beings, as parents, as daughters, whatever it might be. But research ethics is concerned with the kinds of behaviors and actions that researchers have as researchers. So research ethics is concerned with evaluating how research is designed, how data is used. It raises questions about privacy and confidentiality, whether there are conflicts of interests when scientists are being funded by private companies, for example. Questions about authorships and publication, who is an author, who deserves credit, and certainly issues about animal welfare, how do we treat animals when we do research with them, and of course, questions about human protections. And so that's the focus of this conversation. Although all of those others are part of research ethics, we're gonna focus on human protections. So before I go, any questions about these general issues? No questions? Okay, so I'm going to then talk about the protections of human subjects. What are the ethical principles that we use to both conduct research, determine how to do research, and also how we evaluate research. So these are some images of infamous cases of research abuses. I'm sure that you know at least some of them, you have heard of them. This one is an image of
LSD as an experiment, mind control, CIA.
Sorry, I can't. It's somewhat.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't know.
Yes, please.
I need to unmute. No, I need to unmute. I was saying, yes, the CIA had, had experimented with citizens without their permission, without their knowledge, with LSD, with other kind of products. Yeah, so that's what I was saying.
Right. Yeah, so those are some cases indeed of human experimentation. This actually here is on human radiation. So during the Cold War, there was significant amount of experimentation on human beings to assess how radiation affected humans in various ways. So obviously in many cases, in the majority of cases, without people's consent. This is an image of Nazi experiments. Those are probably the most known by people. When people think about human subjects abuses, they usually think about the Nazis and the experiments that they did on human beings without their consent. But there are unfortunately many other cases of research abuses. You have here the Tuskegee is probably one of the most infamous cases of experimentation of on human beings. I assume that all of you have heard about this case, but if you haven't, please let me know and I can discuss it a little bit. And so again, unfortunately, we have many cases of human experimentation on human beings without their consent. and failing to fulfill the ethical duties of that scientists have to protect human subjects. So in response to some of these abuses, certainly in response to the Nazi and the Tuskegee cases, we have developed a system of protection for human subjects when human subjects participate in research. So the regulations that we have, certainly in the United States and Europe, but all over the world, are grounded on ethical principles. So they are legally binding, but they are grounded on ethical principles. And the three ethical principles that are used to, again, both ensure that research protects the rights and the welfare of subjects, and that we can evaluate it according to these principles, are three. These are the three principles that we use. It's the principle of respect for autonomy, that requires that every person is able to choose what should be done to him or her. And normally the way in which we implement this principle is through the informed consent requirements. I'll talk about each of these principles in a second, just introducing them here. The principle of beneficence is beneficence, non-maleficence. That requires that we do not place people at risk unless there are reasonable benefits. And the way in which we implement this principle is by ensuring that we assess risks and benefits appropriately. And the principle of justice that requires that we distribute the burdens of research in a just, fair way. And the ways in which we implement this is usually by ensuring the first selection of subjects and distribution of resources. So some of the examples that I gave you here, sorry, let me go back here. These examples, all of them failed to meet all of these principles. All of these principles failed, were violated in these examples that I mentioned. We have also special safeguards that apply when we recruit vulnerable subjects. And vulnerable subjects are a category of groups. So there are federal regulations that says who is a vulnerable subject. For example, children are vulnerable subjects. People with cognitive impairments are vulnerable subjects. Prisoners are vulnerable subjects. So people can be vulnerable for all kinds of reasons, if they are sick, for example. But there are special categories of vulnerable people. And for those categories, we have special safeguards to ensure that they are not abused. Okay, so I'm gonna now discuss, my plan is to talk a little bit about each of these principles and see what problems we have actually meeting, fulfilling the obligations. Do we have any questions before? I don't know how many of you have participated in research. Have you participated in research, any of you? No.
Yes.
No one. Yes? What kind of research?
Doctoral studies. I'm a PhD.
Yeah, right. So that's research that you conduct.
Yes.
Yeah. But have anybody participated in clinical trials, for example?
No, no.
No. Okay.
Want to, no.
Right.
That's why I'm interested. I want to, for Parkinson's, I want to understand this process before I volunteer and put my trust in an entity that's not related to me.
Right. So obviously the way in which, yeah, someone was saying something. Yes, please.
Yeah, just a question, just a comment. Now with COVID-19 pandemic, which the process was, it's not the usual process for developing the vaccine, which is understandable. A lot of people feel that they are kind of in part of the research phase. in a way, because it hasn't been done for as long, only about a year, 2 years working on it, when it usually takes 10 years or more.
Right.
So in a way, for some people, they feel that they are part of the research
Right.
vaccine.
Right.
What
Research
do you think about that?
subjects. Right. Well, that's interesting. And indeed, it seems that many people do feel that the vaccines have not been tested sufficiently long. Now, that's a very interesting thing. Probably these vaccines are the vaccines that have been most tested in, in the history of testing medicines. It's true that the time has been shortened. It's shorter than what we normally use to approve, many drugs. But the amount of people who have already been vaccinated, and the amount of evidence that we have is significantly higher than for many drugs that are actually approved, and that people use without any difficulties. So the process of researching these vaccines indeed was different than the process that we normally use for the approval of drugs. And as you probably many of you know, the drugs actually, the vaccines were initially used without full approval, in what is saying expedited approval, because of obviously the justification that we needed those vaccines as soon as possible. They are now approved. I mean, the Pfizer has received full approval like any other drug. So it has, met the requirements of approval that any other drug would have met. But we have, again, a significant amount of evidence on the safety and the efficacy, more than we have for many other drugs. It is true that we don't have as much information about the long-term consequences, but that's the case for all drugs that are being approved. The majority of drugs that are studied and that arrive to the market have a short period of time that they are studied. They might be 6 months, they might be a year, whatever the time that people are taking the drugs. The time in which all the clinical trials have to happen, it's much longer. But the time that is being evaluated is, usually not very long. So for most drugs, we don't have long-term information. That's the reason why in some cases drugs are approved and then they have to be removed from the market, because as they are used, we learn things that we couldn't have learned otherwise. Yeah.
The other aspect of it is it's a different type of technology. I'm gonna call it technology.
The vaccines.
The vaccine, right? Yeah, it's a different type that I guess it's not as common, or maybe.
Right. Both the Pfizer and the Moderna use a different kind of technology that other vaccines had used. The Johnson & Johnson uses the same as, for any other vaccine. But indeed, the Pfizer and the Moderna both use RNA, so a different technology to actually develop antibodies. Yes, Felix, please.
Hi, this is Felix Rojas, community outreach in the Bronx. Actually, as today we have a event on West Burnside and in Cambridge and Jerome. The outcome is pretty good. But in terms of the questions, today we are providing the Pfizer vaccine. A question is, because I got this question like every day, since FDA approved Pfizer. So they'll be asking me, Felix, how come they haven't approved? How, like the brother says before, Jose, he says that he mentioned as the many vaccines that we have and effects they have on people and whatnot, and how this was how they got, the question Jose asked is how it was so quick, like to come with a solution for the vaccine. That's one thing. And another thing, people have been asking me, like regular people that come say, how come FDA approved the Pfizer before Moderna, before the Johnson & Johnson and whatnot and so forth? So sometimes I have to come into, not a discussion, because I don't, because as a community health worker, is to educate the people, to educate, not to engage in an argument. So I try to come with smart answers. And at the end, what they came back to me, just, Felix, is about politics and the economics of the big pharmaceuticals. So you understand? So I mean, yes. And then they will say there's too much politics involved. So to me, I try to bring him at the conscious side of it, not into the politics, not into the. So my question is, and again, how come? I mean, Pfizer was approved by FDA, as we all know. So how long it takes for the others to be approved by the FDA? I mean, yes. I understand my question.
So thank you. So yes, the approval process that the FDA has is a complex and long process. Moderna has applied, so they are in the process of getting full approval. And I assume Johnson & Johnson is doing the same. So all of them are actually going through the process. It's just that it takes time to do that because of the, making sure that all the evidence is there, that they have fulfilled all the obligations that they need to fulfill. So I am, I'm sure that they will be approved, that they will receive full approval.
A quick question. Let's say on the worst case scenario, what if one of them is not approved? Let's say just the worst case scenario. You as a professional in your field, what is the worst case scenario? Let's say Moderna is not approved by the FDA. What is going to happen? I don't want to be the party pooper. I cannot imagine that could happen. But if they,
imagine that suddenly they come up with some evidence that has not been discovered until now, well, in that case, the vaccine will not be approved. So that's nothing new. We do that again with drugs that are approved. That people take. Celebrex, for example, is one of those drugs. And, huge. This was very famous when this happened, maybe a decade ago. But Celebrex is a drug that is used quite extensively. New evidence came that actually the drug had some risks that had not been documented when, for a variety of reasons, some of them completely legitimate. So there, people who have concerns about the pharmaceutical companies had very good reasons to be concerned. But the drug simply, in that case, there was a decision to put a black box so that warns people that, the drug is harmful. And in other cases, the drugs simply are removed from the market because the FDA decides that the risks outweigh the benefits of the drug. So if that were to happen, if it was to happen that suddenly we discover that actually the vaccines is not as effective, or that it has risks that we hadn't seen yet. Again, all of this is improbable given how much data we have on these vaccines. But if that were to happen, certainly there would be a decision not to keep using the vaccine. Yeah.
So all of this great ethics control can be a washout when I wasn't going to take the vaccine in 2020 with the present leadership, because how do I trust someone that talks about infusing disinfectant into one's lungs to clean it out? Because it's leadership that really guides our thinking and process in terms of information, real information. But then when you look at the research that's been done and you read headlines such as Trump officials bragged about pressuring CDC to alter COVID reports. Another headline, Trump administration influenced CDC guidance to suppress COVID testing. That is an ethical issue that is beyond anyone's control. Because then you deny people access. They're afraid now because now we have this external group pressuring the most reliable group of all. And it's hard to dispel this when people are still floundering and wondering, can I trust the process?
Right.
How you do, you protect subjects, but at the end, the results, what do you do with the results if you wish to suppress information for whatever your reasons are? And that makes the study invalid because that's what people are saying. I'm going to do my research. On what? What kind of research you're going to do? That's just a generic statement, but look what the government has done once again to make us suspicious and therefore be costly to our lives.
Yes, that is a problem. Clearly, it's a concern with the vaccines, but it can be a concern with any drug, obviously with any medication. Trust is an essential component of benefiting from science. So if we do not believe what scientists tell us, we are not going to do what scientists say we should do. If I don't trust the process that has been followed to approve the vaccines or to test the vaccines, I am certainly not going to use the vaccine. If the vaccine is safe and effective, then I am certainly harming myself or missing a benefit of the vaccine. And this is certainly a problem. The solutions are not quick and easy.
But it's the agency I'm referring to. The agency responsible for this was compromised. CDC was compromised.
Yes, the CDC and the FDA both were compromised. I mean, one of the good things about having agencies that have hundreds of people working in them is that you don't have just one person doing whatever the president in that case or the administration was saying. You're going to have many scientists complaining and making this public. So that's an advantage of having, institutions where people go with goodwill, who, believe in the responsibilities that they have to the public, can actually blow the whistle, as many did. In some cases, they can resign, and this would obviously make it to the first page of the newspapers. And it's a way to at least have some check on how these agencies work. It's true that this also raises questions about then whether we should trust the agencies, given that this happens. But I think that knowing that, again, hundreds of people work at these institutions, the majority of which are people of goodwill who want to meet their responsibilities to the public, gives us at least some grounds to believe that they might not be doing everything that they ought to be doing, but certainly, we have at least some ways to keep some checks on those institutions. But it's tough. It's tough. It's certainly tough when we have administrations that we are particularly concerned about, certainly. More questions?
Thank you. Sorry, that's it. I'm sorry. You can move autonomy. Respect.
Yeah. So this principle of autonomy, again, that requires that we are able to choose to make choices according to our own values and our expectations of what our life should be like. And again, the way in which we implement this principle of autonomy, of respect for persons in research, when we conduct research with human subjects, is through the informed consent process. We ensure that people have appropriate information so that they can actually make decisions that are autonomous decisions. So how does this what does this mean, for someone to be autonomous, for someone to give a free and informed consent? So someone given a free and informed consent when one meets this requirement. So one has capacity or is competent to act. Those two terms are usually used interchangeably, but capacity has to do with psychology, our psychological ability. Competence is a legal term, but normally we use them interchangeably. So one has capacity or is competent, receives appropriate information, the information is disclosed to them. They understand the information that is being provided. They act voluntarily, without people forcing them to participate, and then they consent to the intervention. So this is a voluntary consent, free and informed consent. So we have some concerns with how free and informed, the process of free and informed consent actually happens in the context of research. So you have there a cartoon of a genie that comes out of the bottle, and says, first you'll have to sign this form releasing me from any liability. So there is a concern that sometimes the informed consent process actually is seen as simply a way to release institutions and individuals from liability if something happens. That's not the goal of informed consent. Again, the goal of informed consent is to ensure that people give an autonomous authorization. But in the process of obtaining informed consent, in the process of trying to meet all of these needs, giving information, ensuring that people understand it, give all of the information that is relevant, sometimes we get very long consent documents, particularly for clinical trials that are complex, like clinical trials in oncology, for example, in cancer research. We might have very long consent documents. So what happens when someone is giving, this happens in medicine, not just in research, but what normally happens when someone is being given a very long consent document, like 30 pages.
We sign it and we don't read it. Read
Correct.
the first page and keep on going. Mhm.
Correct. So that's a problem. That's a problem because that means that people don't know what they are consenting to, which means that they are making decisions that are not actually autonomous decisions. So that's a problem that we have. The fact that sometimes the documents are unclear or incomplete, or the information is very complex in legitimate ways. Again, research is complex and it's very hard for researchers to think about how to provide the information in ways that might be understood by people who don't have the same expertise. So this again creates problems for actually offering an informed consent that is actually an autonomous one. So the second principle is this principle of beneficence and non-maleficence, which again requires that we do no harm. So it requires that researchers conduct research, in ways that do not harm people, but also that we maximize benefits and minimize harms when we conduct research. This is why when we are testing drugs, or in this case, the vaccines, again, we check what the benefits, are they effective? Do they prevent people from getting sick? And what are the risks? What are the side effects of the vaccine? So that we can see whether the benefits actually outweigh the risks. And if they do, then we approve those drugs. If they don't, then we don't. Now, remember that often we don't have all the evidence that is possible, because obviously we need to finish the clinical trials, otherwise people won't get new medications, which they also want and need in many cases. So this balancing of, when do we stop a trial so that we can go ahead and go through the process of approval is one that calls for judgments about risks and benefits. So this is the ways in which we apply this principle of beneficence or non-maleficence, we try to ensure that the research that we do is socially valuable, so that it generates important knowledge or improvements in health and well-being. Take, for example, the vaccines, which again, we are discussing. Clinical trials for those vaccines obviously were socially valuable because they were generating knowledge, and certainly if the vaccines worked, as they have proven to do, then we would have also improvements in health and well-being. We also want to ensure that there is scientific validity. So not just that the question that is being asked is one that is socially valuable, for example, how can we develop vaccines, but also that we conduct the trials in scientifically valid ways, so that we have people who are diverse enough so that we actually can generalize the knowledge, that we have sufficient number of people so that we can have generalizable knowledge. So all kinds of things that we want to make sure to ensure that actually the research is scientifically valid. And we also want to, again, assess risks and benefits. So we design, or researchers design clinical trials or research in general to ensure that they minimize risks and they maximize possible benefits to subjects, if there are benefits to subjects, and certainly to society by acquiring new knowledge. Now, there is lots of research that initially research that is in the first stages, for example, that is unlikely to produce benefits to the individuals who are participating, okay? But, for example, we have the majority of diseases, the majority of drugs are tested on healthy volunteers. So people who cannot benefit from the drug, clearly, because they are not sick. We test those drugs in healthy volunteers to make sure that they are safe. So we test toxicity. What are the side effects of these drugs? How much of it can be tolerated without side effects or with minimal side effects? So we ask those questions. And in that case, obviously, the benefits cannot be to the individuals because, again, the individuals are not sick, but they benefit society because we acquire knowledge about the safety or not of those drugs, so that we can keep testing them if they are proven to be safe, or we can stop doing so if they are proven to be too high of a risk in some cases. So this balance of risks and benefits obviously is very important. We also have some concerns, like we did with in the context of autonomy. It is very difficult to assess benefits and risks. We can see this right now with the debate on the vaccines. For some people, the concerns about potential risks, are just serious enough that they prefer not to take the vaccine, and therefore they prefer not to have the benefits that come with the vaccine. In many cases, obviously, in the majority of cases, people balance the risks and benefits of these vaccines, by thinking, well, seems better to have the vaccine, to take the vaccine, given that it protects me against a deadly disease, and the risks of these drugs, according to the evidence, are not significant. So that the balance of risks and benefits seems appropriate. But this difficulty of what I take to be a benefit, someone else might not, what I take to be safe enough, someone takes to be too risky, in all kinds of activities, not just in the context of drug testing, So this makes hard and makes, sometimes for very heated discussions about this balancing of risks and benefits. Also, often we overstate the potential benefits of research. This is understandable, given that one of the things is, well, we want to ensure that people obviously, to incentivize people to participate in research. But we also, incentivize people to believe that science is good for us, which again, in general, it is. So we have this possibility of sometimes saying that someone will benefit when in fact the benefits are not clear. We don't have sufficient evidence to ensure that benefit is going to accrue to the individuals who participate. The social value of at least some research is not always clear. So, we spend millions, billions of dollars on research, and it's not clear that all the research that is conducted is socially valuable, whether, what the questions that are being asked are questions that should be given priority, given many other needs that society or particular groups in society might have. So these are concerns about the application of the principle of non-beneficence, of beneficence or non-maleficence. Any question about this principle?
No, I don't see anything in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So let's go then with the next principle is the principle of justice. And this principle requires that we treat people equally when they are equals and unequally when they are not. Of course, the difficult thing is to determine who are equals or on what grounds, people are equal and on what grounds they are not, so that we can apply this formal principle of justice. In the context of research, our main concern with justice is actually distributive justice. How do we distribute the risks, the benefits and burdens of the research, and how we allocate resources? So this issue about priority, what kind of research receives priority? Why do we find certain research but not other type of research? Or why certain type of research receives more funding than other type of research? So that's one of the main issues in the context of the principle of justice and this distribution of benefits and burdens. So the practical applications, the way in which we apply this principle is in the context of how we choose subjects, what subjects are selected to participate in clinical trials and other studies. So we want to ensure that there is a fair procedure for that, so that research actually has appropriate inclusion and exclusion criteria. So you do not include people who are unlikely to be harmed or stand to not have any benefits when there are others who would benefit more. You want to ensure that subjects are selected precisely because you can minimize risks and enhance benefits. And again, that you distribute the burdens and the benefits in a fair way. As I mentioned before, those examples of research, human research abuses, certainly failed to meet all of the principles, but clearly the principle of justice, given that subjects were not selected because of scientific reasons, but in most of those cases they were selected either because they didn't have power to complain or enough education to know what was happening, or in some cases because the people were incompetent to consent, they didn't have capacity, so it was easier to use them than it would have been to use people with capacity to refuse participation. So this principle is obviously very important in the conduct of research because it minimizes the possibility that we are using our resources in unjust ways and that we are targeting particular groups who actually might not benefit from the research and who might be harmed by the research. And as I mentioned before, we have special safeguards for vulnerable subjects on a variety of grounds. Although again, federal regulations have a more limited understanding of who is a vulnerable subject. So for federal regulations, children, pregnant women, and prisoners are vulnerable subjects. But certainly IRBs take into account other factors that might make people vulnerable to undue influence, for example, when they are participating in research. We, as you can imagine, we also have some concerns related to the application of this principle. Often we don't give sufficient consideration to this principle, to the principle of justice. We tend to focus a lot on the principle of autonomy. It's easier in most cases, you know, to just make sure that people are making, you know, decisions that are good, that they think are good for them, you know, through the informed consent process, even when, again, we don't always do a very good job at that. So we tend to pay less attention to these questions about the distribution of resources and how we select subjects. We also have important considerations when we apply this principle. For example, there is unequal access to benefits, even when we have drugs that are effective. Not everybody has access to them, particularly in the United States, where, you know, access to drugs might be depending on whether you have a job, what type of job you have, whether it has appropriate health insurance attached to it. So this makes it a concern, because sometimes the people who run the risks, you know, the people who are participating in the research, might then not be able to have access to the benefits, you know, when the drugs are approved. So this is a concern. We have also concern about including, you know, again, this problem about, are there groups of people who are more likely to participate in research because they don't have access to health care otherwise, for example, or because we are offering some benefits that might be incentivizing them. Is this a particular problem for some communities? And so if so, it is important to know that. But also we have problems with excluding people from participation. So for example, we know that pregnant women are underrepresented in research. And this is bad. This is very bad, certainly for pregnant women and for their babies, obviously, because pregnant women obviously get sick and sick women get pregnant. And we have to use drugs for which we don't have sufficient evidence of whether they are beneficial to them or harmful. So that's a harm of exclusion. This is the case also with minority communities. Minorities, African Americans, for example, are underrepresented in the majority of research for a variety of reasons. But this is a problem because sometimes we don't know whether there might be relevant differences that might make drugs more effective or less effective, or more harmful or less. So we don't get enough generalizable knowledge for all, for everybody who might be actually taking those drugs. So we have both harms of excluding people from participation and harms of including them when they might be getting more harm, more risks than benefits. So this is, again, a very quick introduction, and I am happy to have now any discussion about any of these issues. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see all of you. Yeah. Any questions?
Hi, Felix Roja again here. I have a question.
Yes.
When you spoke, you mentioned about, correct me if I'm wrong, that in terms of justice and you guys, I mean, in terms of research, would you please go back to it? Because I understand you don't pay much attention to justice. That's my understanding.
Well, that the system in general is one that
Okay.
doesn't pay much attention to justice. So,
Okay.
so it's one of the principles that is less, that people are less concerned with. So when researchers are conducting research, developing their trials, they always pay lots of attention to risks and benefits and lots of attention to autonomy. But less to justice. And the same with IRBs. IRBs, which are the boards that actually, the committees that evaluate research. They also are always very concerned with whether consents are appropriate, for example, or whether, what are the risks and benefits, but less with these issues about distribution of resources.
Reason why, let me ask to you.
Yeah, it's the reason why is because certainly it's easier to focus on autonomy. We all think that autonomy is very important and that we have a particular way of doing that, which is, an informed consent. Here is the document, we can evaluate it. So it appears that we have more control over it than we have over questions about distribution of resources. So we tend to focus on those things that we think that we have more control.
All right, thank you.
More questions?
Good afternoon.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, if something should happen during a research, who is held accountable?
If something should happen, you mean like someone gets...
Yeah, like a drug, or, a drug interaction, or
right,
and of the sort. Who is held responsible?
Responsible, yes. So that's a very good question, and that depends on who or what agency is funding the research. So this is a serious problem that we have in research when we conduct research. So usually you get an informed consent that says these are the risks of participation. Okay, so some risks we know, and then people are willingly taking those risks. So if, for example, we are testing a drug that we know have migraines as a side effect, then some people are going to have migraines, and well, that's it. They'll have migraines. We'll obviously take account of the evidence. Researchers will give you some things to alleviate the migraines. So that's how we do it. In most cases, the risks, we have some information about them, and people will be, managed depending on what the risks are. But at least for some research, one of the risks is death. So some people might die participating in clinical trials, again, because sometimes the diseases that they have are just very bad diseases. And so, there is not much that can be done. In some cases, the there might be a research-related injury. They are called research-related injuries, where the harm that is produced is a significant harm that is unexpected, for example, okay? In those cases, again, depending on who is funding the research or what agency is funding the research, the costs might be covered. The cost of, taking care of the person might be covered, but in many cases it's not. So if people get sick in unexpected ways, people obviously will be taken care in the sense that, doctors will do everything, researchers will do everything that they can do to ensure that the person is taken care of. But the person will be responsible for the costs of whatever happens. This is, again, a serious concern. Everybody thinks that this is a problem. But there is no federal money. So when the studies are funded by the federal government, they rarely have money to pay for research-related injuries. When they are funded by pharmaceutical companies, they usually do. They have some money at least to pay for the costs associated. But it's just for the costs associated with going to the hospital, not with anything else that might happen. And of course, people are always open to sue, whomever they think is responsible. But that sometimes is not very easy to do. So this is a concern in the way in which we conduct research, actually. Good question.
Thank you.
Sure. More questions?
If anybody would like to write in the chat, I can also say the questions out loud also.
I'm surprised that we don't have more, normally this class is always, very, lots of questions and discussions.
We had questions last class. Lula, you jinxed it.
Yeah, maybe I did. Well, we've had a very informative and a very good class today. I thank you so much, Emma. We appreciate your time and your information. So thank you. And we're looking forward to hearing you. Okay, go ahead.
May I say one more thing? I think why you don't have many questions, this is Ms. Herbert, is that the presentation was well understood. So
Thank you.
it was explained very well.
Yeah, plain and simple. No problem.
Thank you so much.
So I thank you again, Emma. Looking forward to hearing you next time around, next class.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Bye.
welcome.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
I don't want everyone to sign off yet. I want to talk to all of you, okay, for a quick minute. And I want you to take a couple of minutes, go through your syllabus. And what you're going to see is you have an assignment that you have to do what's called a photo novella. And a photo novella is when you take pictures, and in a sense, those pictures are your research project around a theme, around an idea that you're interested in. Dr. Elizabeth Cohen will be giving the class. And the last time she gave the class, she asked everyone to take pictures related to COVID and how they felt about the COVID. So I want you, if you can, just read ahead a little bit, look up photo novellas, because photo novellas are very, very powerful. And they have the ability to impact and change the minds and hearts of people. They can be used politically. They can be used in various ways. I want you to read the material on photo novella, but I also want you to start thinking of George Floyd and think of the power of the video that was made by that, it was a young lady who made the video, and what happened as a result of her video. So her video, in a sense, changed politics, it changed people, it changed the way people thought, and that's what we can do with pictures. That's what we can do with photonovellas. So what I want you to do is read ahead. So if you have any questions, we'll talk about them next week. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So if no one has any more questions, I don't know what happened. What happened to my? Oh, here it is.
I
If,
just want to say
go
that
ahead.
Dr. Cohen will be sending me an assignment update because she is changing it quite slightly, but it's still based off the photonovella. So I will send the assignment PDF to everybody, but I will update once I received a fresh new version of the assignment.
Thank you.
Okay?
Miss Agnes, hi,
Yes.
Agnes. Hi, this is Felix.
Hi.
Hi. I've been having trouble getting my syllabus.
Yes,
I
I saw
think
your
I
email.
sent you the. Oh yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's the address in there, please.
Yeah, I'm gonna prepare it today. I'll probably send it out tomorrow.
Thank you. Thanks a
You're
lot.
welcome.
So I want to thank all of you for joining with us this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed the robust conversations on ethics today. This information, I want you to share it with as many people as you meet, as many people as you encounter, as you come in contact with. But I'm going to also ask you to invite other people to join our Community Research Academy program. It's a little late, but it's fine. So encourage your friends, your neighbors, your cousins, and encourage people to come out. Because the more we understand, the more information we can share, and the more we can talk about with others, especially during this COVID time and this time of uncertainty when it comes to clinical trials. This is the time to talk about science and clinical trials right during this season, because this is on the tip of everyone's tongue. So I thank you again. And I appreciate all of you. I don't know what happened to my connection, but I thank you all and have a great, blessed week.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a blessed
you.
evening, everybody.
Thank you. You too.
Coming.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.